I want to give special thanks to my Patreon and channel supporters that make these videos possible. It's them that provide the funds for me to travel to museums, and without them, this content would not exist. Throughout the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union faced off in a technological and ideological battle, vying for power as two polar opposites. While the political, perhaps even philosophical clash of two superpowers was constant, so was their material competition. And this is where today's guest comes into play. It was a jet fighter following a philanthropist concept based around cost-effective political bargaining while going against the grain, prepared to upset the orthodoxy and to take the risk no one else wanted to take. Coming out on top, it was meant to deliver freedom in a compact package. The Northrop F-5. Hello everyone and welcome back to Military Aviation History. I'm your host Bismarck, and today's episode is sponsored ad-free by my patrons. If you like my content, if you like what you see today, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon or PayPal, as this does allow us to produce this kind of content for you and bring it into your living room. Today we are at Drendel in Payerne, Switzerland, having a look at the F-5. This is an American jet fighter from the Cold War period, the early 1960s. It was produced in substantial numbers, but as a special little bit of trivia, it never actually saw consistent service in the United States Armed Forces, proliferating instead far and wide during the Cold War. Produced over a 30-year run, it remains in service to this very day. As always, before hopping inside the aircraft, I'll go over its history and design to give you a full-on tour of this remarkable machine. After the Korean War of 1950 to 1953, we see a definite transition to the fighter jet, and the stage was set for a new breed of military aircraft. In the ashes of the duels over MiG-Alley between Sabres and MiGs, American companies started to develop the next generation of jet aircraft. Northrop Corporation was one of these. Nowadays they are known, for example, for their B-2 stealth bomber, but Northrop had yet to score a home run in the more traditional sense. It had developed the P-61 Black Widow and the F-89 Scorpion, as well as developing a line of experimental flying wing bombers. But it had yet to compete with companies like, say, Grumman, Douglas, Boeing, North American. Two aspects led to the plane that you see right here. On the one hand, the US Navy put out a requirement for a small, lightweight fighter jet to be used on their escort carriers. Although this project was eventually scrapped, Northrop did submit their N-156 design, featuring the General Electric J85 jet engine. The N-156T, the proposed trainer version of this aircraft, did attract attention by the Navy's arch enemy. No, this was not the Soviet Red Fleet, but in fact the United States Air Force. After selection, the prototype was known as the YT-38, and then the plane itself was introduced as the T-38. At the same time, Northrop developed what some might call a cunning plan. In an unsure day and age where technological leaps were being made, where everything tended to go larger, faster, more complex, and definitely more expensive, the scene was set for military aircraft designers to make a profit. If only they could stand out. Northrop thought that a small, powerful, sophisticated, but relatively inexpensive aircraft would just do the trick. So, privately funding the development of a fighter version based around the existing N-156 and T-38 design, the company was rewarded in due time, because most nations out there, even among America's European allies, well, they had trouble finding place in their budgets for the top-of-the-line fighters that were being developed right at this point. Northrop's little project that it kept on the back burner fit the bill. Its projected buying and running cost was low, and it was meant to be easy to use, both by the operators inside and the maintenance crews. Important too was competitive longevity, with the plane being conceptualized in such a way that it was future-proof and could, if need be, receive modular upgrades to the most important systems of the actual aircraft. In the late 1950s, then, Northrop was given the order to build 3 prototypes, with the first flight taking place in July 1959. Promising from the start, some bureaucratic back and forth prevented an immediate order. But by 1962, the requirement for the budget export fighter was pushed via the FX program. The N-156F won the approval and became known as the F-5. Put into production then as the F-5A, it was given a name meant to inspire the potential buyer in that quintessential American way. It became known as the Freedom Fighter. Put into production in 1963, then around 650 A models were built over 9 years, with a parallel run of 200 B versions, which were the trainers. A dedicated recon variant as the RF-5A was also built and known as the Tiger Eye. Licenses were sold, for example, to Canada and Spain. Through these production runs, another 400-odd aircraft were built. The F-5A was good enough for the budget, and then somewhat. Through the military assistance program, the aircraft was sent abroad to beef up and often modernize the air forces of America's allies. Much of this success as an export product did rest with the fact that America was essentially giving the F-5 away. And that shouldn't be taken as a sign that it wasn't up to the task. The plane, as we will see, was very well designed. The aircraft was a success. It was cheap, competitive, simple to fly and easy to maintain. One persistent joke was that you could always recognize the F-5 crew chief, as he'd be the one wearing a clean uniform. Indeed, when used in Vietnam, maintenance hours per flight hours on this aircraft were as low as 6 hours, from the predicted 21.5 hours. So they are far below products like the F-4 Phantom II. Of course, you can't have it all, and any budget option is going to have certain concessions. It wasn't exactly an all-weather aircraft. Its payload was a lot lighter, and range was limited. Unlike the F-4, the F-5 was less flexible. With the initial models focused on ground attack, they featured a diminished air-to-air capability due to the lack of a competitive fire control system for the missiles. However, the initial standard armament against aircraft remained centered around 2 sidewinders fitted at the end of the wings, giving the Freedom Fighter that very trademark sort of look, and 2 onboard M39 20mm cannons. The US Air Force used the F-5 themselves in small-scale combat trials over Vietnam in the mid-1960s as the Squashy Tigers, the little tigers. Some of the experience with the aircraft brought forth certain changes. For example, inside the cockpit, there was also an increase in the defensive capabilities, and in the F-5C, an actual in-flight refueling system. Overall, the involvement over Vietnam was very modest compared to other jets like the F-4 Phantom, for example. And it only experienced a handful of losses. To be fair, its missions often prevented it from running into North Vietnamese MiGs, and it was usually only subject to AAA fire rather than SAM fire. When America pulled out of Vietnam, the Freedom Fighter, now known as Tigers, were left to be used by the South Vietnamese Air Force. That plan went indeed a bit south, because with the North Vietnamese victory, they themselves folded these aircraft into their service, with some of them actually being sent to the Soviet Union for evaluation. But while the aircraft was worth the money, and it showed this in Vietnam, in fact it could deliver a very good supersonic bang for your buck, Northrop still had very luck getting America excited about their product for national use. Yet Uncle Sam remained happy to sponsor the exports of this aircraft to friendly nations. Ironic perhaps for a plane that was once called the Freedom Fighter, the F-5 would often be used to represent Soviet-style fighters, just as the MiG-21 and the MiG-23, for example, in American war games, to train US pilots against such a lighter breed of fighter aircraft. In this capacity as an aggressor, it was, for example, used by the Naval Fighter Weapons School. You might know it as Top Gun. In the meantime, however, the F-5 had become somewhat outdated. The platform was still viable, but it needed some drastic upgrades to stay in the game. The Soviet Union, just like the US, had stepped up its own export game, with especially the MiG-21 now being fielded by about every comrade nation out there. The aim was then not just to achieve parity, but to provide a definite counter to this aircraft. Thus, the F-5 went through a redesign to fit the requirements of the Advanced International Fighter Aircraft Program, aimed to tip the air game once more back towards the West. By continued sponsorship of the so-called export fighter, the F-5 was used to sweeten foreign deals, provide a bargaining chip, or to allow America to access a cheap fighter alternative when sending military aid. Two of these changes to the aircraft would be a more powerful version of the J-85 engine, giving about 20% more thrust, and a more powerful air-to-air suite. Thus, the F-5E was born in 1969, and it did come with a caveat. Again, the bureaucracy got in the way of an immediate success. Congress decided that competitors should also submit a new design so that the best could be chosen to feature in the export-orientated fighter program. Come to a quick conclusion, Northrop still won the competition and was awarded with a contract of 328 aircraft, now officially known as the F-5E. It offered an updated budget option and was formally introduced 3 years later. Just like with the A and B model, the F-5E was followed with a two-seater version, the F-5F, and a recon version, the RF-5E. More recently, the airframe was then upgraded to the G model, the Tiger Shark. Well, this didn't go so well for Northrop, but that lies outside the scope of today's video. I've been going on for some time about this plane as an export fighter. So to put this budget perspective into context, generally nations could receive about 7 to 10 F-5s for the price of a single F-15. As an export platform, especially because America was largely just handing them out in sponsored deals, it was just what was needed. A cost-effective tool that would not overburden allies or the treasury. The F-5E has a length of 14.6 meters, a span of 8.3 and a height of 4 meters. It is powered by the General Electric J85 GE21, giving a maximum thrust of about 4,600 pounds each. It can achieve a top speed of around about 1,700 kilometers, Mach 1.6, but cruises roughly sit around 850 kilometers an hour, Mach 0.8. With a clean range of 900 kilometers, the aircraft can hold 670 gallons of fuel in 3 internal fuel tanks and an additional 275 gallon fuel tank externally in the center line. Ceiling is around 550,000 feet. Empty, the aircraft weighs about 9,500 pounds with a maximum takeoff weight of 21,000 pounds. The plane is equipped with two M39 20mm cannons, 280 rounds in each, and two AM9 sidewinders on the wingtips. Additional pylons can of course be added for rockets and bombs depending on the combat mission. So up front of the aircraft you of course have the pitot tube And then behind that, in the unpainted part here, you have the radar system, the dish, with most of the electronics attached to it a little bit further back. So one of the neat features on the wings of the F-5 is actually the wing maneuvering flap system. As you know, usually planes have flaps on the trailing edge of the wing. In the F-5, it also has them up front on the leading edge. This way you can create a more curved wing surface area, which helps you with maneuvering the aircraft at various speeds. There is various settings that you can use depending on your need, and this does provide the F-5 with a little bit of an edge in some situations. So beneath the wing, of course, you have your gear popping out from the centerline fuselage. Beyond that, in the middle, set between the gear, you would have, for example, your pylon for your external fuel tank. And to the left and to the right of that, or port of starboard if you prefer, you've got your air brakes right here, very close to the actual gear. So the F-5 also has an arrestor hook here. Now this might seem a little bit strange considering that the aircraft isn't a Navy aircraft per se, as it is seen service in the Navy training schools. But on carriers and so on, it's not really exactly known for that kind of service. However, it is available in the F-5, and various nations, for example Switzerland, also use these on landing on their airstrips. It just makes things a little bit easier, and since the option is there, there is flexibility built in. And in the F-5 we have 3 internal fuel tanks, one set here, the other one behind that, followed by the third one, and these hold the internal load for the aircraft. Of course, the F-5 doesn't have that much of a range, but as said, it does also have auxiliary fuel tanks that it can use. And in the back you of course have your drag chute compartment. Right, let's get into the F-5. And immediately we realize it's an American cockpit because there's so much room. Whew. So the cockpit of the F-5 is officially one of the most comfortable cockpits I've ever sat in. Mind you, not everything that would be on the seat is actually here, so the Freedom Fighter is giving me a little bit more freedom than I deserve. But it is exceptionally free, and even wearing a thick flight suit and all the equipment, I think I'm going to have plenty of room. It's a very, very nice feeling sitting in here. Although there's a lot of stuff going on, exceptionally clean and easy to read. This is really, really just a joy looking at it and having everything organized in a nice manner, at least for me. Now, starting on the left side, going over to the right side as per usual. We're starting off with trim switches. We've got your chaff and your flare. After that, we have your radar settings. We've got your throttle, of course, for the engines, as well as the flaps. Then going up front, we have the engine starters and so on. We've got some of the weapon selector switches here, armament position selector, missile volumes, the interval, bombs, gun missile, and so on and so forth. External storage, of course, as well. And we've got a all-important emergency jettison button. Moving slightly to the right of that, middle console, we've got the radio and communication set. Then we go to the right-hand side, and we have the cabin temperature, everything that is essentially required for the pilot to feel happy and cozy in his actual aircraft. Going further to that, we have this pylon selector for the external fuel tanks, and of course the booster pumps. Going up top, starting again on the left-hand side, we've got the landing gear release, we've got a drag chute that can be pulled. Up top we have the speed given in knots, followed with a Mach-on. We've got a gyroscope, we've got the altimeter, we've got a compass and directional indicator, the artificial horizon, and we've got your variometer. As well as that, we have an angle of attack meter here as well. This is the second one in the actual aircraft. Moving towards the middle, we've got your radar scope, and up top we have your reticle and gun sight. When you look at the gun sight to the left of that, you'll also find an angle of attack indicator right there. Moving to the right, all the way on top, we've got a nice little compass here, set easy to read. And then to the right, we have all the dials that have essentially to do with the operation of the engine. So we've got your RPMs, we've got your engine temperatures. Of course, there are two engines in this aircraft, so you've got two of each. We've got the the nozzle opening, we've got the fuel quantity that you have, the cabin pressure to the right, and the oil pressure. We've got another scope on the left of that, and below that the clock. The aircraft is then also equipped with a G-meter all the way on top of that as well. Then moving all the way to the right-hand console right here, we've of course got the canopy lock button lever here, and we've got some of the oxygen regulators up front. We've got the warning lightings and the system information, and then we have also the navigational control panel right here, followed all the way on the right-hand side, essentially where your elbow would be, with some of the navigational lighting and the interior lighting of the aircraft. So in the middle, of course, you have your weapon of choice, the flight stick. It has 3 buttons and 2 flick switches. Very simple, easily set. All in all, like I said, a lot of room. I like it. To get out of the aircraft, you of course have an ejection seat, and that will take care of everything once it is activated, shooting you into liberty, essentially, hopefully landing on the correct side of the front lines. But there we go. That is essentially the F-5 cockpit rounded up. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let's see you outside. No, we don't see outside. I'm doing the roundup here. The history of the F-5 is largely one of success, seeing that it was produced en masse and exported far and wide, whether it was Brazil, Greece, Indonesia, Iran, Mexico, South Korea, or Switzerland. Some of these countries, such as Iran, still actually operate them to this very day. On the other hand, the F-5 only had limited use at home, where more sophisticated and complex machines upstaged it. Eventually, the concept of a pure export fighter had limited mileage. Nevertheless, it is one of those great jets from the Cold War era, as it does, more than any of the other planes, save perhaps the MiG-21, embody both the technological race as well as the political dynamics of its time. And to see them in service until this very day, well, that's just a cherry on top. Thank you very much for watching today's episode, and I want, of course, to thank Kinzey here in Payerne, Switzerland, for allowing us to get very close with this aircraft. All the information for the museum, of course, in the description below. And if you enjoyed this content, please consider supporting future videos via Patreon or PayPal, as this helps me produce this sort of content for you. And please also remember to share this video. I want to say goodbye at this point. Have a great day, good hunting, and see you in the sky.